All right, it looks like we had a few more people join. We'll go ahead and get started. It looks like we have a question already in the chat box. Will deck be available? Yes, we will be sending out the PowerPoint presentation to all registered attendees. This webinar is also being recorded, so we will share a link to the recording as well. So hello and welcome to today's webinar brought to you by the San Diego Regional Green Business Network. My name is Michael Arvizu with the Center for Sustainable Energy. I'm going to be moderating today's workshop. I'm joined by Jonathan Handwit, co-founder of thinkPARALLAX, who's going to be providing today's presentation on marketing strategies for your green business. A few notes on logistics for today's webinar. Due to COVID-19, there's higher than normal usage on the GoToWebinar platform, so you may experience connection issues. As I mentioned, the webinar is being recorded and slides will be made available to all registered attendees. If you do have any questions, please submit them using the chat feature. We're going to have a Q&A session at the end of Jonathan's presentation, but if you do get disconnected, feel free to email those questions to info@greenbizsd.org. And here's a quick look at today's agenda. First, I'll be giving a brief update about the San Diego Regional Green Business Network. And I'm going to hand it over to Jonathan, who will give a presentation on how businesses and organizations can sell stakeholders on sustainability. Finally, we're going to reserve the last 10 minutes for Q&A. We received a lot of great questions through the online registration form. We plan to address some of those, but if you have any additional questions throughout the presentation, feel free to drop those in the chat box. And since we're hiding behind the camera this morning, here's a look at today's speakers. Jonathan Handwit with thinkPARALLAX and myself, project manager at the Center for Sustainable Energy. And as I mentioned earlier, this webinar is brought to you by the San Diego Regional Green Business Network. The SDRGBN is a no-cost program that offers San Diego businesses the opportunity to engage in resources that help improve sustainability. Before the program was impacted by COVID-19, the network coordinated networking events and tours of local businesses to encourage idea sharing across the business community. The network has since transitioned to online learning, offering these educational webinars as well as bi-monthly newsletters. And I know there are several new businesses on today's call, so if you are interested in joining the network, please visit greenbizsd.org/join. Our next webinar is going to be on how to track and benchmark your energy data using Energy Star Portfolio Manager. That'll be on September 10th from 9 to 11. You can register for the event on our website, greenbizsd.org. This webinar was coordinated in collaboration with the San Diego Green Building Council, a local nonprofit dedicated to sustainability in the built environment. The SDGBC has a green business committee made up of industry professionals, and they've developed a resource page for small businesses. You're invited to explore these resources at sdgbc.org/greenbusiness. They will also be accepting applications for their Green Business Awards soon. You can reach out to them at greenbiz@sdgbc.org for more information about the awards. And as Jonathan will cover in his presentation, awards are a great opportunity to showcase all the hard work your business puts into improving your sustainability. So great opportunity there. And with that, I'm gonna invite Jonathan Handwit to our virtual stage and let him take it from here. Jonathan.
Great. Thank you so much, Michael. And really thank you to the San Diego Regional Green Business Network for the opportunity. I'm really grateful. I went and surfed this morning, and when I came out of the water, I got really excited about this because, as I'll kind of explain to you for a second about our business, I'm kind of far removed from San Diego, and so I thought to just give you like a 1-minute background on me and how I've been connected through San Diego forever. And now it's, I guess I'm kind of coming back home. But I actually, 20 years ago or so, I led marketing for a nonprofit. It's called Partnerships with Industry. Actually, before that, I'll take a quick step back. My mom's a social services person, my dad, a business owner. And so I think I've been caught in the crust between those two pieces of business and sort of what we'll call sustainability my whole life. Started this company 17 years ago with my partner. It was a branding agency, and then it was a web firm, and then we had the content piece. And about 10 years ago, I had a project manager, and after she was working for us for about 6 months, I was like, "Hey, what do you think we do?" And she said, "Everything you do is for the greater good." And I said, "Oh, you think so?" And so we went back and looked at our projects, and lo and behold, she was right. We had done an HIV campaign for the National Institute of Health. It was in Hillcrest and North Park. We did a water saving campaign with the Water Authority here in the city, with the county, fundraising for UCSD. And so when I realized that, it was like I've subconsciously been attracted to this work. I think maybe because it's how I was raised and my values, and also the people that I think that's all of you that are on the call. Just our values are the same. And then I consciously, I'm like, oh, what a cool project. We can actually have do a project that's making an impact, and then I can actually make enough to, put some bread on the table. So our business evolved to purpose about 10 years ago. And we moved up here, and I should say, take a step back, as we actually started from a little garage in Ocean Beach. And then I got the landlord to let us rent the apartment out as our office. And then we moved up here to Encinitas, where I am now. We have a couple offices here and one in San Francisco, and some people around the country. But anyways, we narrowed down a purpose about 10 years ago, and then about 5 years ago, a really clear focus on corporate sustainability and communication. So kind of have the gamut of experience of kind of everything in and related to branding and marketing and communication. But the piece right now is all around sustainability, and it's corporate, and Qualcomm is the only company that we work with anymore that's in San Diego. So coming back full circles, I'm super grateful to be connected with all of you. And if there's ways that I can get involved more almost like on a personal level with things that are within the community, I feel like I really want to. So I think I just wanted to say thank you for joining and attending, and hopefully this is a little bit useful. And I appreciate your time. Really quickly, I'll talk about what we do for a second, and then I thought I would you all are in the sustainability space. I just thought, hey, what's kind of topics that are top of mind? I have all of the stats from tons of research around why it's relevant and important. So if any of you need to sell this to leadership, to anyone on your team to get budget, or kind of you name it, I have a ton of resources, which I'm just going to go over a couple. Talk about also who really cares about it, which relates to some of the stats. Talk a little bit about our formula and how to communicate sustainability. And then I pulled a few examples, and I have a ton more that I thought would be relevant to. I saw the attendee list of who was coming, so I pulled a few examples that are a little bit different than ones we typically pull to use as examples, so and I can kind of talk through those. And then after that, again, I'm happy to answer any questions. So really quickly, who we are: we're a branding communications agency, and we're focused on telling the story of a company's social and environmental impact. Our values are there: passion, creativity, candor, and we really practice what we preach. So you can see on the left side, we're just trying to live the same values that we're telling our clients they should be living. We're a B Corp, or climate neutral certified. And I think for the most part, we're doing the right thing. We've evolved our business, like I mentioned, over the last 17 years, and we're typically working with the corporate communications, the sustainability, or HR teams within larger corporations. Occasionally it goes into marketing, but mostly it's around communication around sustainability or citizen, however you talk about it. And it's industry agnostic. So some is food, Southwest, energy. So it goes across the board, but the consistency is just our knowledge and understanding of sustainability. What we do really quickly, on the left side, we're doing all the kind of advisory research piece. In the middle, we're doing a lot of the strategy and planning. Comms planning, we do a lot of sustainability reporting. We do social media for some of our clients, campaigns, and also create a lot of thought leadership, which might constitute as what you might know as PR. And then we do the execution, like we have writers in our office and designers, kind of the normal team of what you would think of what an agency has, but it's just with a focus on sustainability. So I kind of wanted to start off, and I don't know everyone's knowledge and understanding of sustainability, but there's definitely, and I made a spoof video, which I should have included, kind of making a joke of the sustainability space because people are constantly confused in all the naming and nomenclature of how we talk about sustainability. But when we talk about sustainability, it's not just for the environment. It's really everything. It's social. It's how you run your business. It's everything in between. And sustainability, when you think about it, it's like how long will this last with the least amount of impact that it's making? And often now people are talking about it as shared value. Like, how are you providing value to all the stakeholders that are involved with the work that you do? And it's ESG, and you'll hear that more and more. And I think ESG will probably take over in the place of the word sustainability, and then if not now, in the near future, and definitely in the investment space, which I'll get into. And it's really a 360-degree view of how it's all connected. It's not just water saving or renewable energy or something you're doing with the community in terms of volunteering. It's really how it's all kind of connected in its terms of shared value. I said no more fluff. I did a presentation about 2 months ago, and they titled the presentation something like "No More Greenwashing" or "Greenwashing 2.0," and I was like, that's not really even a thing these days. I mean, granted, people are still greenwashing, but the term is really dated. And the difference is that things now are and have to become extremely transparent, authentic, as in you're doing what you say you're doing and you have proof behind it. It's human-centered, it's connected, and you show the connectivity to all the pieces and then validated. And the validated pieces, I'll get into it a little bit, is like you have your stories up front, which you lead with these human-centric stories, but then depending on the different audiences, it's actually validated with data. So big overview, no more fluff. I pulled these out and had that for a presentation, and it's pretty funny because since then, I think Black Lives Matters and social injustice would fall under human rights, but it's just so interesting how quickly the landscape changes. And the work that we're doing, I was kind of talking with one of the guys that I work with, it's so interesting in our space that, I mean, if we looked at what we were doing, 10 years ago or 5 years ago or 2 years ago, and now, and then we think about what it's going to be in the future, it's just evolved so quickly that I feel like how we talk about it, what we do, what we're focused on, you just need to stay so current with what's happening within the world, but also within your industry, that it's almost difficult to stay abreast. So I pulled out a few terms I thought that were pretty relevant that I'm hearing our clients, everyone's talking about. And it's top of mind both with what the company is doing in terms of their strategy, but also in terms of communication. And this is like big picture thinking, right? So rice is a big piece. Of course, you hear everything about climate change, energy conservation. There's a lot around supply chain transparency. A friend of mine works for this company called Beauty Counter, and she actually went, Micah is in a lot of their cosmetics, and she actually went out to India and to Japan to actually both create a documentary, but then also to really get clear on responsible sourcing and put it out there. And that was all around supply chain transparency. Sustainable investing, which I will get into, is humongous rise, plant-based meats or alternative meats, alternative energy, regenerative ag. I'm not sure how much this is integrated into the work that you guys do, but if you are in any way associated with the food industry, it's definitely top of mind. Plastic is a big one. And then the Sustainable Development Goals, which most of you probably are aware of, but it's 17 goals that the UN put forth collectively to create change and a movement to obviously make a positive impact around the world. And you can look at those, what companies are doing. They're aligning some of the work and their strategies of what they're doing to 1, 2, 3, or 5 of these goals. So if you got a second, go on to the UN site and search for SDGs, and you can kind of see something that your company might align with. And part of using those in terms of like your communication, it's a way that you can show your customers or potentially consumers on how you're part of a bigger global movement rather than just in our little community here. These are just some of the stats. I'm going to go through these kind of quickly. And again, if any of you ever have a need to present anything for any different audience or even a different topic, I bet you we have 30 to 50 reports from the big Deloitte, all kinds of organizations on why sustainability is important. So please just reach out to me or reach out to Michael and reach out to me. But at the top, Unilever, huge conglomerate. They have a huge portfolio of sustainable brands that's driving the majority of their growth. Forbes did research, 88% of consumers want brands that help them be more environmentally friendly. in their life. I'll get into this, but buyers actually want sustainable products and they're going to pay more money for them. Highlight millennials, which again, I think a lot of you probably know this. They represent 30% of our buying power, and they're willing to spend more money on a product that comes from a sustainable or a socially conscious brand. They actually expect their brands to be more transparent in their marketing, which goes back to the slide I had a few slides before of like transparency in the work that you're doing, and really talk about the impact that you're making, make that connection. And then the majority, 75% of millennials, they will probably change their purchase or consumption habits to reduce their impact on the planet. So obviously these numbers are only going to increase. So if this isn't integrated yet into the work that you guys are doing, definitely think about how it should be. ESG investing, this is a lot of the work that we're doing. There's been a humongous rise in the investment space, and I'll try to kind of sum this up really quickly, is that what's happened is that over the last 5 years, the investment community has learned that sustainable companies are actually more profitable. So the largest holding company in the world is called BlackRock. There's a guy that runs it, his name is Larry Fink, and every year at the beginning of the year, you'll see if you're paying attention, he writes a letter. And 2 years ago, he said something, he writes a letter and pretty much everyone jumps, like they say how high, he says it's this high. And so 2 years ago, he said you need to put purpose at the forefront of your organization. You know, it's not just about profits. And then last year, as in January, I guess 6, 7, 8 months ago, he said you really need to integrate sustainability more into the work you're doing. You need to report to this framework called SASB. And he even went as far as saying they're not going to be investing in companies that are holding or working with fossil fuels. So when he says this, everyone jumps. And so what's been happening is that with that, there are ratings agencies, ESG ratings agencies. So if you go to buy a stock, you can look and see what their ESG rating is. And if obviously the rating's high, you know, people would invest in it, and if it's low, they won't. Kind of simplified explanation. So what's been happening is the majority of publicly traded companies around the world, but especially around the country, are looking at their ratings. They have low ratings, and they're realizing they need to both change their sustainability strategy to get the ratings up, and then they need to disclose more, like put more out there and be more transparent. So about 2 years ago, I had a call. It was like in a matter of like 5 days, it was a call from Coca-Cola, Manpower, Keurig, Western Union, and basically the CEO or the CFO had reached out to them and said, hey, where our ratings are low, how do we get them up? And we got these calls, and I looked over at the guy that works for me. I was like, what is going on? So this is basically it. So the whole ESG investing space is just blowing up. Quarter of all the world's investments are in ESG related funds. And how this relates to you potentially, and I don't know all of your businesses, is what's happening is in order to be more sustainable, these publicly traded companies are looking to their suppliers around sustainability and transparency. So they're going to start choosing suppliers, which we're seeing happening based off of the sustainability initiatives and reporting that they have in place. As far as part of the RFP process, they're going to be looking to you, saying what measures do you have in place and how you're reporting. And they're going to choose your competitor over you because you have things in place, because it then ultimately affects this. It's all kind of interconnected. So big push ESG investing. Employees want it too. They're your biggest brand ambassadors, and I'll kind of get into that, but they'll take a pay cut to work for an organization that aligns with their values. They'll stay longer, and people across the world really want to work for an organization with a strong social conscience. We'll get to these quickly. I just want to really reiterate that like the sustainability strategy should not be a standalone piece from your business strategy. It should really be interconnected. So you can kind of click through these for me kind of quickly. It must be rooted and core to the business. It's got to explain why it's core to the business. It's got to be connected to the business strategy, and it should be connected to this overarching purpose. So really, why you're in business should relate to your sustainability strategy, should relate to the impact that you're trying to make, should also connect to your profit and why you're actually a business strategy. So I tried to pull some examples that I thought were a little more tangible and feasible, because a lot of the times we're talking about Patagonia and Nike and these big brands, and I just don't always think that it's so tangible to wrap your head around what they're doing, because the size of the organization, the scope of the work, the reach, and it's on so many levels. it's in different scope. So I pulled this one. So hopefully you guys can kind of maybe relate to it. So there's a guy, I kind of know him. It's up in Orange County, and his name is Charles Antis. And you can see the logo. So I guess they've been in business for 30 years. And so he's a roofing company. And he provides residential roofing and I guess commercial roofing all throughout Orange County. And the business itself, you can say, hey, how does this, we could try to make a story, or we can try to say, hey, how does this relate to sustainability? How is sustainability embedded, or what part of sustainability is part of what they do? And it's pretty difficult. But what they do that I think is extremely clever, and it's really rooted in him, which then became rooted in like the purpose and the business itself, was that he's all about community. So he's out and about, the guy, I couldn't tell you, 50% of the year speaking at events, speaking at kind of you name it, or being part of all kinds of launches, but partnering with organizations all across Orange County. And that is their, that is their target market, Orange County. So I think it was 40 nonprofits that partnered with, which seems kind of unbelievable. But that's really both this altruistic sustainability, or remember, sustainability is not just environment, but their social strategy, sustainability strategy, and also their business strategy. So they've lined it up, which is something that we see a gap with other companies, is that they've figured out, like they're working for Habitat for Humanity, where clearly the skills that they have with their team on putting in roofs relates to Habitat for Humanity building houses, but then they also partner with other organizations that are unrelated to roofing. And what they've done, and they've been really very strategic about it, is that they've kind of mapped out the, you can't see me, but I'm waving my arms, the map of Orange County, and thought of what organizations are in what regions, both that can connect to those communities, but also kind of connect with them as their brand. And so basically, kind of in a nutshell, if you're looking for a new roof and you're looking to look for roofing company X versus Y, and given all things the same, as in the pricing is going to be the same, but you know that in some way the Antis Roofing Company has an impact either with the school that your kids go to, or the Red Cross, or Habitat for Humanity, or someone that you know, and they're making a positive impact in the community, there's about 100% chance that you're going to choose to work with him. So that's really been their social strategy and their sustainability strategy, but it's also really integrated with their business strategy. And I think that's a good, really interesting example of a smaller business. It's probably maybe like maybe 100 people work there, so it's not a big Patagonia. So we go to the next slide. Just pull a couple slides from their site, just like saying how they're getting their people involved with philanthropy and their volunteering with their team. But for them, it's all about community. I don't know exactly where they mention environmental sustainability, but for them, they focus really on the S of ESG. So go to the next slide. You can see these are some of the nonprofits they partner with, and they also get awards, which I will mention later is kind of like a necessary evil. But it's across the board, all through Orange County. And so he's just so deep with it that it's like he's going to be connected to some organization that someone that you know that's looking for a roof will be part of. I just pulled this one. I don't know which on the left, which arena he's at, but it's like from some arena. I'm not sure where, maybe the Anaheim Ducks, I'm not even sure, or the Angels, I'm not sure where it is. But they do some advertising, but it's all focused on community and the impact that they're making, and you can see it says Community Corner. So I think it's a pretty good, interesting, kind of tangible example of a company that's embedded sustainability, and not environment, but into their business strategy, and it's really been benefiting them. Quickly go through this. I think this is pretty interesting because we're not a marketing agency, and the difference between us and other organizations, and I know most of you probably have to deal with this, is we're not selling anything, so we can't prove any sales. So when we go to ask for a budget or pitch a project, we call it a return on impact on the right-hand side. So why are we doing this? Who is our audience? And what's the benefit? And so you can see at the top on the right, for employees, it's recruitment and retention. For investors, I mentioned that. And for customers, which again, it can be integrated into the marketing, and it can relate to sales, but oftentimes it's these other audiences that are the focus. Communities would be perception, especially for him. It's a good example of perception in Orange County. And then NGOs could be advocacy or exposure. And just not to spend too much time on this, on the left, getting really clear on the business purpose, how that integrates into the actual business strategy, sustainability. And then in the middle, that communications piece where you really get clear on how you're telling the story, and then how you're communicating it both internally and externally, which we'll get into more. Communicating sustainability. So we have this thing here, which we call our flavor wheel. We've had it for a while. We update it. It's by no means all encompassing, but what its purpose is to kind of give you an idea of topics on the left and formats and channels on the right. And I had a conversation about an influencer campaign recently on how we could kind of integrate that around with sustainability. And obviously, I realize that's not even on this wheel, and several others. But you can see, and I guess the point of this is not to really outline exactly what you need to look for in terms of topics and channels, but to give you an idea that there's a lot out there, and think through what actual topics will resonate with your different audiences, and then what channels on the right are most appropriate. And I'll break this down as we kind of keep going through the presentation. So actually, we can even just keep going. So we broke it up into those 5 audiences, and I highlighted a couple because I thought a few were more important than others, and we don't have 2 hours to go over this. So I just want to kind of give you what I thought was most important. But the first one are employees. And I think this is one that's often overlooked. And you should really think of them as your biggest and greatest brand ambassadors. And I know there's someone that you all know that works at some company here in San Diego, and granted, times are a little bit unusual, but he or she works at a company and they're just such a big fan of the company and the brand, they can't stop talking about it. Whether it's the products, whether it's the service they're offering, the impact they're making, the cool stuff that they're doing. And when you think about it, and the companies that we're working with sometimes have 10, 20, 30, 45, 50,000+ employees, is that the reach of one employee is enormous. So you just think about how impactful that could be just on the clients that you're working with, and with the community and the organizations. Just like really engaged employees, and I probably don't need to tell you this, can really help sell sustainability, and I think they're often overlooked. And so these are, again, a few stats. They embody a high level of trust, they have really great reach, and then employees are really on the front lines. The better you can educate employees, and I have an example of a project we worked on around the work that you're doing, the better it's going to be for the brand as a whole and the impact. I won't spend any time on this, but again, this is like, okay, some of these topics potentially are relevant to your employees. Again, this is very corporate, and then some of the channels obviously are most appropriate. So for big, huge companies, they all have an intranet. We use Slack here. We have a couple internal meetings always once a week, and then we have bigger ones every quarter, bigger ones every half year. And we make those are really important times we can bring up what we're working on, topics that are most relevant to our business. So you need to find the topics that are most interesting, and then again, the channels that will be most impactful. And sometimes we even we'll do an employee engagement survey, even with our 15 employees, even if it's up to 20, just to really understand where they're at, what they're interested in, what they want to hear from us on. And I highly recommend doing that if you don't do that. And it can be a 10 question survey, and you should really do it yearly if you're not doing it. I would not highly recommend it. But this is an example. I thought it's all around employee communication, and it's for a big carpet company we've worked with. It's called Interface, and they have a guy named Ray Anderson that has passed away, but he really puts sustainability at the forefront for the company. And he really said, we're in the business to make a positive impact on the planet. And so they came up with first a campaign to become carbon neutral called Mission Zero, and they achieved that goal. And they worked with us the last couple of years in this new campaign called Climate Take Back. And they're basically moving to the point where they're actually going to become carbon positive, meaning they're taking more carbon out of the atmosphere than they're actually putting in, which is pretty great. And so these guys lead with environmental sustainability in terms of like their communication, their brand, how they carry themselves, versus the Antis Roofing, the example I had before. They really lead with the social aspect. So I'm not saying you would need to choose one or the other in terms of like how you should be marketing or communicating yourself. It should be holistic, but most likely, given the bandwidth and the time and the energy that you have, and we all have not enough, it seems to make the most sense that you would have one or two topics probably that you could really latch onto, that your brand and your organization becomes known for. And so for these guys, it's environmental sustainability, and that was led by the CEO, which is just carried on until now, and probably will be for the life of the company. So we're working this campaign. It's called Climate Take Back. It was really we did this global survey of all the employees and research. We came up with this big campaign to engage all of them. I think there was want to say 7,000, but it might have been 11,000 employees around the world. And so how do we create behavior change, and how do we really integrate this into the way that they think? And kind of have like a 5-step process on what that looks like. And for this, it was kind of like an awareness piece at the beginning of like, what is a company doing? And then the second piece is like kind of how can you engage with it as part of your lifestyle? So what we did was we had this campaign, and for the first time, honestly, I've been doing this for 17 years. The first time in 17 years, we actually mailed that booklet at the top. It's called Our Unfolding Journey. We mailed it to each individual employee's house, and it was a way like, this is the direction of the company, and this is why sustainability is important. And then it was also why sustainability is important to your life on a personal level. So it's honestly the only time that we've ever gotten that personal was with engaging with employees. But I mean, it's kind of extreme. But on the other hand, I think it's interesting to look at. So these were mailed in individual houses. We had posters that went around all of their showrooms. They had factories around the world. Of course, we had videos, stuff coming down from the CEO talking about the campaign. Kind of all of the general communication you'd expect. And then the 2 things I think that were probably most impactful and useful is we created these interactive walls. You can see the woman standing in front of this wall, and they were in their factories around the world where it had highlights of what needed to be thought about as part of the campaign. And then there was whiteboards all throughout it. Again, they're like 8 feet by like 20 or 30 feet, and they're huge. Where the managers can write questions, and then employees can answer, or employees can pose questions. And the managers can answer, anyone else can answer. So I actually had photos of this. I probably should have included them. It really turned out well. But went with this, which I think could be something that you guys could do, is we created these, we call them conversation guides. And they were guides for all of the VPs, directors, and managers on how they needed to communicate around sustainability to their employees. And it's probably like a 1 to 2 page kind of a cheat sheet. It's just like, how do you get the dialogue going? What does this conversation look like? How often should you do it? It was like once a month, and then tidbit, like say every, once a week. But it was really, really useful. It was probably the most impactful, and probably for you, maybe the least amount of effort in terms of like a lift for you of like creating just a 1 page, 2 page conversation guide on how you talk about sustainability for your organization. And highly recommend it. In the investment space, huge pieces around this ESG reporting. And I think what I mentioned before is companies actually that are if you take a BMW and a Tesla, this is probably the best example I can give you. BMW has a lot more environmental infractions and social issues than Tesla ever has, and Tesla themselves, the car itself, obviously is focused on a positive impact on the environment, but the ratings for Tesla are lower than BMW. And that's simply because BMW fills out the questionnaires from these ratings agencies, and they also are disclosing and providing as much transparency and information publicly, so their ratings are higher than Tesla, believe it or not. So, or at least they were in recent history. So, and for the investment space, it's transparency. It's having an investor hub on your website that's providing all the data on the site. It's not so much about storytelling per se, and we are doing reports with storytelling. It's more about the data that goes along with it. Customers, and this is where I think it's probably most relevant for most of you guys. Some of the topics I think that are relevant of just like, what are our goals? What is our progress? Transparency around that. I mentioned that before, how you're integrating the SDGs. The environmental pieces, some of those become table stakes. Like I think companies customers and consumers just expect you to be using renewable energy or to have a recycling program. I don't think it's that special. I think, you say, hey, we're going to become climate neutral, or there's issues, there's things you can gravitate towards and you can latch onto. But I think some of those things are table stakes. But you have to be talking about them because everyone else is, and that's what's expected. And the same thing for the social side. And then the formats of channels, it really goes across the board. And I think we'll get into that a little bit more. And I can answer any questions on what this looks like in terms of like bringing it to life. But it's, think about the channels and really get clear on which ones are using and which topics are most relevant. I pulled this one because I think it's a good one. I'm guessing most of you are familiar with Allbirds, but shoe company, it's, I don't know, maybe 5 years old. I've actually had a couple conversations with one of the 2 founders, and sustainability is embedded into the organization. And so both in the products, but also with every single thing they do, from their websites, their marketing, to their packaging, and they're not overly upfront about it, because they say here in this ad, they say run hard but tread light. They're inferring the limited impact that they're making on the environment. And for them, they latch more onto the environmental piece than the social causes versus like the roofing company. So I think we see a little bit of a trend here. But what I wanted to call out, which I thought was super interesting, is that I'm not sure if you saw it, but this was, looks like it was in November. So that's, 7 or 8 months ago on Amazon. Someone knocked off their shoes. So they made, obviously like an exact copy, and sell it, which is nothing unusual. But what was unusual was that the knockoff actually wasn't using any sustainable materials. So I forget which of the two founders wrote this letter, this op-ed to Jeff Bezos saying, hey, I really don't mind that you guys are knocking off our shoes, but if you're going to do it, I mean, you might as well, I'll give you the formula and the IP for our the construction of our products, so you can actually make a sustainable product. Because if you're going to put more products out in the world, do it the right way. And so what this is, and this is really them being a thought leader. So they're okay to give away all the IP because they realize there's more to it. There's more out there in terms of like growth for them, and this is insignificant in terms of like their business fighting with their business for this knockoff shoe, but that they really, without probably knowing it, become known as a thought leader. And I think a similar idea is Volvo, and I don't know how much of you know about this, but when you think of Volvo, you don't think of a race car or a sporty or a truck. You think of it as a safety. You think safety with Volvo, and part of the reason you think of safety with Volvo is because years ago they shared their IP to all the other car manufacturers on making their cars safe, because they're like, hey, we just want a safer world out there, and so they become known as the safe auto manufacturer. And I think Allbirds obviously is doing the same thing by writing this article. So I think begin to think of ideas on how you can position yourself as a thought leader of, oh, we really know these guys as X, Y, and Z. And again, the more I'm talking about this, it's probably focused more on the E, environmental, or the S on the social. So I think the ad, when that came out, and we were really excited about it. So I had to include it. So we'll go on the next one. So I pulled I pulled a campaign from a public agency that I thought was kind of interesting, cheeky, and relevant. And it was pretty cheeky, fun ad. So I thought it was a really clever campaign. And then I realized, I don't know how many of you have been to Australia, but I don't know if you know what the word tosser means, but a tosser, I want to say it's basically, it's like a kind of an idiot, so if you're like, you're being an idiot. So they've kind of, obviously it's really clever. They've pulled a double meaning with the word tosser, saying don't be an idiot, but also don't be tossing trash. So they've come with a really clever, fun, engaging campaign. And the campaign, obviously there was a video that went with it, and then there were ads, and the ads, they bought media all around. And I'm sorry, this is in New South Wales, which is a state like in and around Sydney. I think it's right below Sydney, or where Sydney is. So obviously there's a big littering issue. And so the state of New South Wales put this campaign out to reduce littering around the whole state. And so it's cheeky, it's fun, it fits with, I think, the people, and it resonates well. And so these are some of the ads. This one says, I didn't know I could get fined. And it's just, they've had nice consistency about tossing the trash, it being stuck to you, kind of like almost showing stupidity. And if you go to the next slide, there's a couple more ads that are fun. I toss my butts, they're not a big deal. I know it's wrong, so I do it when no one's acting. And again, their campaign, they have a consistent message across: don't be a tosser. If it's in the bin, it's on you. Sorry, if it's not in the bin, it's on you. They're just basically saying throw it away, it's absolutely your responsibility. So typical campaign, like I think ran across the whole state. And then with that, they actually created an app that allowed residents to report people that were littering. I think it was by the use of their license plate. And that was a great way, that's kind of a big brother society, but it's another way for people to really take on the responsibility of getting fined, take on the responsibility of not littering. And it was successful. I was reading about some of the results. 10,000 people downloaded the app. There was a 360% increase in the registry, people reporting littering. And then 3,000% increase in visitations to the EPA's anti-littering web pages, and then hundreds of thousands of views of these ads. So I think according to their stats, it seemed to be really successful. But I think what's nice is that the tone, the action. It was like toned and actionable, and it related to the people that were there. But what I also looked at to make it, I mean, to kind of put it into perspective, I saw that the cost of the campaign was $1.79 million. I don't know if that, I'm assuming that was Australian dollars, which is a little bit less than what we spend here, but it's also just for you to know, you got to spend money to actually to have some action. So if we go to the next slide, when I was searching around, I saw the exact same campaign, and this is for, I think it's around Brighton, somewhere in England. They just lifted the same campaign because it was clever, and tosser means basically idiot in England too. But what I thought was kind of interesting was here, it says, why you're dumping rubbish here. I'm an idiot. I don't care about this community. I think other people should pay to clean up after me. Don't be a tosser. Please use a bin or take your litter home. And it's definitely in your face. And then I realized by seeing these two campaigns is that the culture of these two countries was different. And this one, apparently, that was in your face, and actually, it's honestly quite rude, apparently would resonate best with that audience versus the one that was in New South Wales would fit better with the people that live there. So I think it's a really interesting, it's literally the exact same campaign, and the finds I think are almost the same too, but just how they positioned it as it relates to the audience and how they're changing the look, the feel, the tone, that the tactics might be similar, but it really, as that relates to a different audience. So if you go to the next slide, we're getting close to the end here. I wanted to include this because this is probably top of mind of all the companies we're working with. You know, Qualcomm, I mean, all the big brands, but also the public agencies that I'm talking to, everyone's like, what do you actually want to be known for? And what do you know, how can you position yourselves to be kind of that industry thought leader? And it's by a handful of ways. And I think getting out and speaking at events, whether they're sustainability specific, going to industry conferences, which again, it needs to be virtual now, or having your own events, which we're even doing ourselves. Earned media, where you're doing something that's actually worthy enough that someone would want to write about it, but that's, you know, part of you being in touch with the folks that will actually put your name out there. Owned media, the easiest way I really think is, you know, make sure you have a part of your site where you can actually create content at the very least around some of the work that you're doing. And then social media is, again, kind of table stakes, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute to include it. And then awards, it's a necessary evil. I mean, some of these companies we work with, they hire firms to actually just submit for all the awards for them, from best places to work to kind of you name it. So I just would encourage you to submit for a couple of awards as they relate to your company, your industry, and then what your actual audience would care about. So we go to the next slide. And I threw a lot down your throat. I didn't include everything, and I have a lot more to add, but I just wanted to say, just remember that one size doesn't fit all. If you think back to that flavor rule that I talked about, is just narrow down the topics that are relevant that you actually are working on, narrow down the channels, and really start from there. And again, make a year-long marketing, communication strategy, but don't think you need to talk about everything, and focus on the ones that you're doing well, that relate to your industry, your business, and that resonate best with your audience. So that's it for now. I don't know if we want to get into the questions.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Jonathan. We really appreciate you providing that presentation for businesses in San Diego. If you want to go to the next slide, just so we can, although the dog is cute, you can take a look at Jonathan's contact information on the next slide. And as I mentioned, these slides will be shared with all attendees today. But at this time, we'll get into questions. I have a few questions from the registration questionnaire. If you do have any questions, feel free to drop those in the chat box at this time. So we'll go ahead and jump into it. So how can you engage audiences that are less technical? So you can tell, like, sustainability, especially energy efficiency, renewable energy, can be a technical topic. How would you go about engaging audiences on a less technical level?
I think always I would try to lead with human-centric stories, both for the technical folks that want to get a higher understanding, and then even, you know, the folks that are not technical, and then bring in the data to support the claim. So high-level overview of the impact that you're making, you know, human stories, and then the data behind it that really supports the claim. And if you can give me a very specific example, I can give you a very specific solution, but lead with the human-centric stories. I think that's the best way to approach it.
That makes sense. Thank you. And then you talked about social media. How can you effectively communicate behavior change over social media, especially when you're talking about sustainability initiatives?
For the behavior change piece, I think it's more about like, I'm working on a project that's kind of similar, and we need to start off with the behavior change and what is the behavior that we want to change to? How can we change it? And then the communication piece is the method to kind of get it out there. So for that specifically around social media, if it was just through social media and it wasn't a bigger story, because I think there's a bigger conversation to be had around behavior change. I wouldn't expect that you could just change behavior through social media, but if you had to only focus on social media, you need to think through what incentives can you offer that would offer a shift in the behavior, because it's pretty narrow focus in terms of like all the different types of communication that you might be using to change behavior. But if you were only using social media, there needs to be some type of incentives. And then you need to really think through like, how are you growing a community? Don't focus on just the social media piece. Think of the community at large, and the social media is kind of one piece. And then it's really also about creating like, facilitating like meaningful dialogue, a meaningful back and forth relationship with the people that you're engaging with, and then like, what would you want them to do around changing behavior and getting them to actually take action.
Cool. So kind of a multi-channel approach, and then focusing on what would motivate them.
Yeah, I mean, it's not short-minded. It's sort of simple-minded to think that, that's the wrong way to say it, but just that social media would be the way to change your audience completely, unless you were some really cool and dynamic brand, which is possible. But I really think you need to think like, what are all the different ways? Think about the topics or the channels that flavor wheel. Like, okay, there's probably 4 different avenues we're going to need to engage with these folks on, and through this is how we're going to get them to change behavior. And social media is just one of the channels. But what incentives really make them shift their behavior?
Good. And then you mentioned awards as an important piece, but sometimes it could kind of feel like you're tooting your own horn, I guess. So how do you best craft your sustainability stories so that you're not really focusing on bragging about yourself?
Yeah, good question. I think what you should focus on is actually the benefits that your products are having on the individual products or services that's having on the individual's life, not on the products themselves. And that's probably the biggest piece of like, how is it impacting either, you know, a business's life or the individual itself, you know, depending on what you're selling. And then I really think along that lines of like, okay, personal benefit of like emphasizing transparency and like being more authentic. And I think that some of these big companies we work with, I see them not wanting to talk about their weaknesses. And I absolutely encourage you to talk about your weaknesses and just to show some vulnerability, because I think that that's going to really create an easier way to put your shield down and create a connection between you and your audience. Because no one's perfect, especially now, no one's perfect. And no one can really hide from it. But I think the more that you can do that in terms of your storytelling, the better. But it's really being human, showing their weaknesses, and then in terms of like not tooting your own horn, is like the impact that it's having on people's lives, out of the businesses that you're working with, or the customers themselves, the consumers.
That makes sense. And then you mentioned everything. It really needs to be transparent and authentic, and understanding your customer base and your audience. Some businesses have an older, maybe more traditional audience. Do you have any strategies for connecting with an older, more traditional audience?
Yeah, well, I think it goes back to that flavor wheel, and I don't mean to keep going back to it, but if there was a few things that were, if you were debating between sustainability and profitability, right, as like your selling points for, you have a product here, I'm looking at something on my desk, nothing's sustainable, unfortunately. A water bottle, a water bottle here, my water bottle. And you're thinking about marketing it, and you're thinking about the different audiences, and you say you have someone that's a millennial, you have someone that's a senior, that's over 60. My gut feeling would be that they care more about cost savings than they care about sustainability. And I think the millennial cares more about sustainability than cost savings. So when you're thinking about marketing the older people, the older generation, which I feel like I'm getting closer to, is think about what do they actually care about and lead with that. So I'm not saying don't talk about sustainability, but you probably need to lead with like, we're saving you money first and foremost, and we're saving the planet, versus the other way around for millennials.
Great. That's a good note. So the business works with a smaller team. Are there initiatives that are best to showcase?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, because we work with these big, huge brands, but I have conversations with folks around town that have smaller, tiny company, all kinds of restaurants, kind of you name it. And I feel like you need to latch onto one, maybe two things that, again, would fit well with your audience. Either you're going to choose something environmental, or choose something social, and maybe you are kind of choosing both. But to kind of come with an example off the top of my head would be like the coffee shop right next to our office. I know the owner, and they don't really do that much for the community, but their community is really everything, and they're impacting the environment besides the supply chain is fairly minimal compared to someone else. What are they doing for the community? So, for example, they could say, and coffee is maybe not the best thing, but every Tuesday we give away free coffee to anyone who's homeless or is in need of coffee between 7 a.m. and 9 a.m. Or we're supplying coffee to all of the doctors and nurses that have been fighting COVID. Just figuring out one initiative that you can focus on that relates to your business is probably under the environmental or social, that really connects to your audience. And so for the coffee shop around the corner, I think that would resonate really great with everyone here. I know that there's a place called Fish 101, and they did that, and they have two little restaurants here, and they spent, every other social media post from March, April, and May was them bringing food to all the doctors' offices around town, and hospitals, just giving it away because they're frontline workers. And it obviously resonated really well, but it also goes back to what their business offering is. And I think we see very often companies that we work with that they're putting time, energy, and resources to initiatives that don't relate back to the business. There's one tech company here I've had a conversation with, and they were giving a ton of money away to, I think it was Haiti. It was another country. It was Haiti as a kind of disaster relief. And I was like, well, why don't you just do something that relates to the technology their company is like offering? So for example, it would be like Apple or whomever giving away laptops right now. It's all the kids across the country that don't have access. There's a digital divide. They don't have access to devices, and they need it actually for distance learning. Like, that would be smart. So for you as a small company, think of one initiative that really relates to the business, and how can you latch onto that with your team, and then how can you potentially engage with the community, and then how can you communicate about it?
Right, how that message resonates with your client base. Cool.
Mm-hmm.
So on average, you mentioned creating a annual or a year-long communication plan. On average, what would you say is the typical length of the process of creating that sustainability strategy and rolling out the communication plan?
Well, they're two separate things. So the sustainability strategy is, working, I'll say, with a sustainability strategist to map out our goals for what we're doing for the environment, social causes, and how we're running our business or governance. That's one step, which, depending on the size of the organization, it could be a couple months to quite a lot longer. And I think if you're smaller, which I'm guessing most of you are, a great first step would just be to do some marking within your industry to really understand what's happening. And then you could do a bit of a stakeholder engagement process where I would really reach out to some of your customers, some of your suppliers, and your employees of what's really most important for your audience. And you come back with what we call like a materiality assessment, what's really materially important for the business. Make a plan off of that. Our goal is to reduce X, Y, and Z, impact the community X, Y, and Z over the next 5 years. And then for the communication strategy and planning, same thing. We have kind of our own process and how we work through it. We build out a 1-year detailed plan and then use like a 3-year high-level plan. And that process probably takes us 2 months. It depends how many people need to be involved. But the more clearly you can define those audiences and then what you'll be doing monthly for each, the easier it will be for you to kind of go into it weekly to see how you're laddering back up to those goals. And I know social media you mentioned was kind of a big topic. And I wanted to mention really quickly what we're doing around social media and how that pertains to what you guys are doing, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, really quickly. So if you have more than one handle, so we work with some companies who have, like Qualcomm, for example, they've, I don't know how many handles they have. Best case scenario is all of the social media content that you push out through your social media should go through one handle. And I know most of you guys are probably small and you probably only have one handle, XXX company, at Instagram or LinkedIn or Twitter. But in the case, so best case scenario, all through one handle. And with that, 1/3 to 1/4 of all the content that you push out from the work that we've been doing and all the research we have should be related to sustainability. And again, focus on those topics. And then how we do it, which maybe is interesting to you guys, is we actually, at the beginning of the year, we pull out what we call moments in time. And moments in time are all of the potential events that are happening specifically for the company, but also a global, like local, national, and global events as they relate to sustainability and our organization. And we map those. So probably there's like 2, 3, 4, 5 a month throughout the whole year. You said there's 50, plus there's the things that your business are doing. We map out at a high level what's happening for the whole year. And then the week preceding the beginning of each month, so in about 2 weeks, we will finish a whole content calendar for the next month. So we have all the posts, the content, the image lined up for every single day for, say, I guess that would be September coming up. And we use two pieces of software. One's called Heyorka and one's called Buffer. And with those, we can put all the content up there. Anyone can review it, anyone can work on it, and then anyone can also approve it. And it's really a streamlined way of creating all the content, keeping it consistent, because there needs to be consistency around how much content you're putting around for social media. And then when there's time for like community management of actually responding to inquiries, you're not focused on creating the content for that month. You've done it all, like say the week prior. That's my one high-level recommendation of how you could feasibly manage having like integrating sustainability to your social media.
Right, being prepared and having a plan.
But also creating all of the content, the month before, which sounds kind of crazy, but it's the best. That's the best way to do it.
Sounds good. Well, thank you, Jonathan. Really appreciate your time and all the information that you were able to share with our businesses. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to myself or directly to Jonathan. His email address is shown on the screen, but we'll also include it in the slides in the follow-up. I want to thank everyone for joining today's webinar. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks again, Jonathan.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks, everybody, and please feel free to reach out. I have tons of info I can always share to help you guys along your way. Have a good day and a good week, and keep at it.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.